to another day of Heart Snuggles. We're so happy you're here today. And I brought a guest from Australia here. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Hey, my name's Cam Fraser. I'm a men's sex coach. And yeah, I just work with a lot of guys who have sexual function issues or just want to have better sex.
That's incredible. And how did you start that?
A journey of overcoming my own sexuality concerns. So back when I was in my late teens, I was watching a lot of porn, really struggling to connect with the women I was being sexual with. I was drinking a lot and in a bad mental health space. That manifested as like erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation and all this other sexual function shit. So I went on this big journey of overcoming that, me personally, and that included like Pilates, yoga, counseling, tantra, psychology, just education in general, a whole bunch of other things. There was no guys really that were talking when I was 10 years ago, talking about sex and sexuality in a really open, mindful, positive way. And so here I am 10 years later, having a couple of degrees of psychology and sexuality under my belt, and some years as a counselor and as working in the disability sector and as a yoga teacher and as a coach. And what I want to do is I want to be the guy that I needed 10 years ago, someone who is open about sexuality, isn't so dogmatic in like, oh, you need to be a man and this is what a man looks like, and just kind of offer just really practical information, but also like education as well, that's like medically accurate, that's scientifically validated, but also draws a little bit on like the spiritual and esoteric teachings as well. I think there's so much value in both of those spheres, and my work really tries to integrate the two of them. So yeah, it's been a whole 10-year process to kind of get where I am now. I'm now a father as well. I've got a lovely partner and we've got a little son, and so I'm hoping to be a role model for him, and I want to talk more about fatherhood and sexuality and parenting and sexuality now as well, because that's reflective of my own journey. So yeah, I just use my own life experience, I suppose, to talk about the things that I talk about, which is really keeps me fresh, I suppose.
That's so good. And I think that's one of the biggest gaps in society, is like there isn't a big enough space for men to go and ask these questions. Like women often like can talk to their girlfriends about it. There's so many resources, but I'm glad at least nowadays it's expanding. But yeah, your work is so impactful, and that's so great that you get to raise a little son into this world, like with all the knowledge you wish you had when you were younger too. That must feel so damn good.
It does. It feels very exciting, especially because I'm just like finding all these amazing resources, like about consent and about bodily autonomy and about cultures and different people and all this amazing stuff that I never had when I was a little boy, and my parents probably didn't even know about. So it's fun, like finding all these cool, amazing resources for my son.
So cute. So let's talk about some of the main man myths that you encounter.
All right, cool. So there's like this stereotype, right? If we think of who's this stereotype of like the alpha male or like the stereotypical guy, right? There's a couple of things that go into this unspoken set of categories or set of lists that we think of when we think of like the stereotypical guy, and I kind of call these myths because they don't necessarily have to be the case. You just because you don't tick off those things on the list doesn't mean that you're not a man. And so some of those things are like hypersexual. Like men are always wanting to have sex, right? The idea is like men are always down to fuck. They always will say yes to sex. They're always thinking about sex. There's some random like old wives' tale that men think about sex every 7 seconds or something like that. And it's like the narrative or the myth there is that the men are hypersexual and will always say yes to sex, right? And that's perpetuated by, it's perpetuated by media. I think Joey from Friends, right, as the epitome of that myth or that narrative. It's like perpetuated by our friends, our peers, right? The mentality that some guys have with regards to sex, which is like quantity over quality, or like, this sounds a bit crude, but like every hole's a goal type of mentality when it comes to sex. Like that's the whole myth in action, I suppose. An extension of that myth is, well, if men have high sex drives, women have low sex drives as well, right? So it then transgresses into this this myth around female sexuality and female desire and female libido, I suppose. So that's a big one. That's a huge one that I often come up against. And guys often feel like something's wrong with them or they're broken if they don't want to have sex all the time, even though that's totally natural and normal, and fluctuations in desire are perfectly fine. So I have to do a lot of educating around that. It's the same in couples. If in a heterosexual couple, she has a higher sex drive than he does, then it can cause some concerns because they think that's not the way it's supposed to be, quote unquote. That's not the way it should be. There's a lot of shoulding when it comes to sexuality and masculinity. So that's one. Another one is that. Oh my God, there's a whole bunch. So another one is that like if a guy has an erection, it means he's aroused, right? So this is like more kind of bodily myth, I suppose, or a more somatic style myth. And for the most part, right, there's a correlation between having a physiological response like an erection and a subjective response like feeling turned on and feeling aroused. But that doesn't always line up. That isn't always the case. So talk to guys about morning erections, for example. If you've got morning wood, oftentimes you're not turned on first thing in the morning. You just have this physiological response in your body because of the peak in testosterone and some other stuff that's happening throughout your sleep. There'll be other times when you will get an erection. Maybe it's, we've all got stories of maybe getting an erection in class when we're in our teenage years and definitely not being turned on. We're in the middle of math class, but our body just kind of has that response because we're going through that kind of change in our hormones. But there's plenty of other times that we get a physical response, maybe just to stimulation or maybe just to, some sort of change that's happening in our body, but we don't have the subjective turn on experience in our brain, in our mind. And so it's really important to, I guess, like be mindful of that. And this is called arousal non-concordance. It's more prevalent actually in women with regards to lubrication and feeling turned on. There's a bit more of a discrepancy there, but the same thing happens in people with penises. And, this leads to, the perpetuation of this myth that if he's got an erection, it means he's turned on can kind of lead to some darker myths around like men and sexual assault, like the myth that kind of men can't be raped because if he's got an erection, it means he consented and it means he enjoyed it, and things like that. So that goes down a pretty dark path. So that's another big one is like and that I do a lot of educating around like what's normal for your body. Fluctuations are really normal, erectile disappointment and versus erectile dysfunction and what the difference is between those, and just kind of like navigating the whole space around flaccid penises. We just have this fear in society of flaccid cocks for some reason. I don't know why. So just kind of like helping men and women and everyone really understand that it's okay. So that's another big one. Another one, again, with regards to sexual function, is that ejaculation is the be-all and end-all of a sexual experience for men. That ejaculation equals orgasm, that those two are one and the same, but they're actually two separate physiological processes. We can have an ejaculation without an orgasm, and we can also have an orgasm without an ejaculation. It just takes a bit of practice. So that's another, that can be a big light bulb moment for people as well, of like, oh wow, I can do this. I can choose to have an orgasm without ejaculating, and because I don't ejaculate, I don't enter the refractory period, so I can actually have another orgasm, and you're telling me I can be multi-orgasmic? And so that's a big snowball effect for a lot of people when they hear that for the first time. And we've studied, we can differentiate the way the orgasm and ejaculation happen in the body. That's been factually kind of studied. So I do a lot of educating around that myth that orgasm and ejaculation are the same thing, and that you have to ejaculate in order for sex to be successful, right? Oftentimes if we take ejaculation out of the equation, people go, oh, then how do I know that sex is finished? And it's like, well, use your imagination. Think what other things could come into play, right? So that's another myth that I like to talk about. There's a whole bunch like that. Like when we really start to go into it, there's like, if you can think of the stereotypical male, the stereotypical alpha male, right? Think of movies or TV shows and just kind of list everything that they embody or that they are in order to kind of fit that criteria. And all those are essentially a myth. Like men have to be dominant and assertive and aggressive. Myth. That's not the case. It doesn't have to be true. There's so many, and once you kind of tune into them, you see them everywhere. They're just perpetuated all around because it's easy. it's easy to continue the stereotype. It's easy to continue that. I mean, in movies and TV shows, it's just lazy writing. You can just lean on stereotypes. It's super easy to do. But in our daily lives, it's comfortable to kind of fit the stereotype and not have to challenge it. We don't really have to think about it. It's like, oh, this is just what a man is, so I'm just going to try and do that. But oftentimes, that's a really rigid and narrow way of being a man that only a certain few people kind of fit in. And so for a lot of other men who are men, right, just because they don't fit that mold doesn't mean they're not men, are feeling ashamed or are feeling, like there's something wrong with them, or are feeling anxious, right? A lot of anxiety can come up because they don't fit that specific prescription of what it means to be a man. And so that's where a lot of anxiety and especially like performance anxiety and sexual dysfunction can kind of come from, is because they feel like they're not where they quote unquote should, again, where they should be. So yeah, I'll rant all day if you let me. So I'm just going to stop there.
Yeah, should's such a naughty word, and it's so custom in our society. And it's so sad. You're right. There's always so much programming around the messages, and if a man wants to explore something else, like it's not like he gets a safe space to do that. It's like everyone else is like, going to say something about it. So how do you allow men to start stepping into like who they truly are and exploring other parts of themselves?
So I've got like a little kind of step-by-step process that I work with guys through. And the first is like, firstly, normalizing. So a lot of guys come to me saying, this particular thing is wrong, or this doesn't work, or I'm broken, right? That's the kind of language that they will use. And so the first step that I do with guys is tell them it's okay. Tell them it's totally fine. Just educate them around like what their body, I guess what they could expect from their body. A lot of guys want to have an erection all night long. And I'm like, look, dude, even on pills of Viagra, there's warnings saying, if you have an erection for more than 4 hours, you got to go see the doctor. So like normalizing expectations about bodily function and what it means to kind of be masculine and all that sort of stuff. That's the kind of first step, is just telling them that's totally fine. Nothing is wrong with them. And so once we have that like safe groundwork kind of laid down, from there, I start to encourage them to, I do a lot of work on like men with regards to self-pleasure and masturbation and things like that. And so from there, I kind of give them almost like permission, I think, is like what they're looking for, is like this permission piece, this permission slip to like start exploring other areas of their body, right? When I talk to men with regards to how they masturbate, it's very often like genital oriented, and not even genitals, only a specific part of their genitals, which is just just the shaft of their penis, pretty much, maybe the head of their cock. So I encourage them to kind of explore other areas of their body and start off with like just your balls, or just like your thighs and your groin. You might like to like bring your chest in, or touch your nipples, or whatever it is, but like just kind of have that curiosity. I kind of foster that curiosity in them to kind of explore other areas of their body. That's the kind of next step. Once they're, I guess, more comfortable or a bit more familiar with that, then we start to like, okay, let's kind of bring this a little bit further along. And if they're open to it, then I'll talk to them about like prostate play and prostate stimulation and what it feels like to be penetrated, in order to learn how to become a better penetrator for your partner. I'll talk to them about like expressing and communicating their desires. Like, how can you, now that you've brought this curiosity into your own body, into your own experience, how then can you kind of like extend that to your partner and kind of create that space for them to be a bit more curious and a bit more open. So again, it kind of really starts with their own body. It starts with their own experience. Like, a lot of guys come to me like wanting to be better lovers, and I'm like, you're your best lover. You're going to have sex more times with yourself than you will with another person throughout your life. So what's that relationship like? And that's kind of where I start, is with that relationship with the self. So to kind of help guys break all that stigma down, again, like the things that come through is like the safety piece, the normalizing piece, the permission piece. A lot of guys just want to be told it's okay for them to touch other parts of their body, and then just giving them some suggestions like, hey, here's a practice called pleasure mapping, and like the name suggests, just map pleasure across your body. Notice where it feels good, notice where it doesn't feel good. Just collect information about yourself. And so that tends to be the snowball that gets rolling, and then they can have these really beautiful experiences with themselves and then with another person.
I love that process. And it's so nice and refreshing to hear that from a male perspective, because women are always encouraged to like to get in touch with their bodies and love their bodies and do all these things, but I honestly have never heard that from a man, and of course it makes sense, and like it should be, that should be something they do, but men have a lot of body shame too, and it's not talked about, and it's always glorified, like women's body shame and women's body images, but men have just as much if not more, but it's so untalked about.
Yeah, totally. Like there's a slight difference in the way that men are feeling ashamed of their body compared to women. So like a lot of guys feel like they need to be really muscular. They feel like they need to be like that. They need to be like big and hulky, like The Rock or Chris Evans or whoever you see as the latest superhero, right? There's like this physique aspiration that guys have, and that can lead to a whole. This is a whole different conversation, but the bodybuilding community and maybe the dysphoria that's within there. And so a lot of guys feel, the term that's often thrown around is like, oh, they feel like quote unquote beta males, right? Which is such a stupid. I seriously, if people use alpha and beta, unironically, then I often say that they shouldn't be taken seriously. But so the fear is there of like not being quote unquote man enough because they don't look like a superhero or like an action hero. So that's one kind of body shame that guys have. Another one is penis size. Like a lot of guys are ashamed of the size of their cock. I've read up on the statistics, and 75% of guys are unhappy with the size of their cock, and of those 75%, 99% want their penis to be bigger. And if that's the percentages, then something's definitely wrong, right? There's this bigger is better mentality. Talking back to the myths, that's a big myth as well. Is that having a bigger penis makes you a better lover, or that women want a larger penis, right? There's a lot of myth around that. And so there's a lot of body shame and anxiety around penis size, and that's perpetuated predominantly by two things. First is porn. It's very easy to point a finger at porn. The average porn star penis is 3 inches bigger than the average civilian penis. So there's definitely, in terms of representation, something going wrong there. But then also, like, guys don't see regular guys' penises. Like, unless you're in the locker room or unless you're, like, doing a workshop where nudity is normalized, we're just not seeing average dudes' penises. Flaccid as well, right? Again, this fear of the flaccid penis comes through hard and fast. And so, like, having that lack of exposure as well to just the regular men's bodies, regular men's penises, we create this story in our head of like, oh, the only penises we see are these huge ones, so therefore every guy's penis must be massive and mine's so small, even though they might be smack bang on average. So that's another big body shaming and anxiety that people have. And like small penis jokes as well are just like, they're thrown around like no tomorrow in movies and TV shows and all that sort of stuff. So again, things like that are perpetuating body shame, body anxiety for men.
I know. I always think that's so sad. It's like, that's not something we can change. Why would we ever make fun of someone for something that we literally are born with and we cannot change? Like, it's just so not cool. And I hate how normalized it is and everything. And I obviously don't have one, but still, like, I just feel that pain for people. So yeah. And I want to touch on too, like your thoughts on porn. You've said a little bit, but I want to go into that more because that's something that's extremely normalized too. And yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I did a whole 2-hour podcast by myself on my thoughts on porn. So I'll try my best to summarize that in the next couple of minutes. So I differ from a lot of the spiritual and sacred sexuality people's and teachers' kind of opinions on porn. I don't think that all porn is bad. I'm not hardline anti-porn, right? That's a position that a lot of people in the tantra, sacred sexuality space take, is that porn universally is bad and that we shouldn't use it. I'm not of that opinion. I think there's a bit more nuance to this conversation. There's a bit more gray area, right? Because I also don't think that all porn is good. I don't think that we should just be free reign watching porn willy-nilly like we are now. I don't think that's positive as well. I think there's a middle ground that is important to explore. And that's where I kind of sit. That's where my opinion is that I'm not anti-porn. I'm not pro-porn. I think there's, something in the middle that we could be talking about, which is how to use porn ethically and healthily, that's conducive for exploring your eroticism. And I kind of frame this as like using porn as a tool. And when I say using porn as a tool, the porn that you're using first is really important to consider. So there's ethical, fair trade, educational, really positive, diverse, inclusive porn out there. Right? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying using porn as a tool. We're using that type of porn, not the mainstream tube site, Brazzers, shit that's out there, which perpetuates all the stuff we've been talking about. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing as well is like, once you're using that type of porn, how are you using it as well? So are you just sitting at a computer screen, kind of like I am now, hunched over your laptop with your mouse in one hand and your cock in the other and just kind of going through the motions and jerking off like a chimpanzee? Or are you being really mindful of how you're using this tool, right? It is a tool. It's something that you're using as an external stimulus to kind of facilitate your erotic process or your arousal or your self-pleasuring. Can you put your laptop maybe up on a shelf, and can you stand up, and can you kind of connect with your body? Can you breathe a little bit more? Can you, instead of watching the porn, can you plug headphones in and listen to it? And that way you're not using a visual stimulus, you're using an auditory stimulus, and you're changing the way that your arousal patterns are happening. The way that you're using that ethical porn is also really important to be talked about. But people aren't having those types of conversations, at least in the tantra, spiritual, sacred sexuality communities. So that's where I really find interesting, and that's what I kind of talk to the guys that I work with about. I don't say you have to stop watching porn right now and never watch porn ever again, because I think there's some really beautiful erotica and amazing educational stuff out there. All this ethical porn can be used to explore your fantasies as well and to explore your desires. Maybe you're interested in BDSM, but you don't really feel comfortable doing it in person just yet. So you explore a little bit of some ethically filmed BDSM, which is like really representative of like healthy consensual BDSM. Maybe not something that's a bit more extreme or isn't so clearly consensual in the mainstream world. And so you can kind of get this idea of like, oh, that kind of is something that I desire, and that is something that turns me on. I do want to explore that, and it kind of fulfills that desire. Or you learn about something that you dislike as well. Maybe you had this idea of what group sex might be, and so you look at some ethically filmed group sex scenes, and you're like, oh no, actually that's way too intense for me. I actually don't get turned on by that, and you learn more about yourself. So treating porn, again, that particular type of porn that I'm talking about, ethically produced porn, fair trade, it's all above board. Using that type of stuff as a tool is, in my opinion, the healthiest way to go about it, rather than dogmatically and rigidly saying all porn is bad, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, all porn is good. That middle area is kind of where I sit.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think anything should ever be black and white. And I was only introduced to ethical porn like a year ago. I didn't even realize it. My friend sent me some beautiful sites, and I was like, this is incredible. Like, this just feels so much better. And so how can people find sites like that? What's something they could search?
Okay, so Make Love Not Porn is a great one. It's real couples that are having real sex, right? Like it's their chemistry. It's mutually pleasurable. They upload it to the site, so that it's coming from people that like want their stuff to be seen. Like you have to pay for it as well, so money's going back to them. It's fantastic, and because it's quite amateur as well. Like it's not high production value. Some of it is more high production value than others because people put more effort in, I suppose. But it's just a lovely representation of normal people, right? Of regular people having sex, which is great. There's like you could go to Literotica, for example, which is auditory porn. It's like short stories or erotic literature that you could listen to, which is really hot and really arousing. And again, doesn't have that visual element to it. So it's another way of kind of creating new pathways of pleasure in your body. I know Erica Lust has got a whole range of different things as well. She's kind of like at the forefront at the moment of ethical porn. She seems to be kind of like the person kind of torch bearing it. You could go like to the Feminist Porn Awards. They've got a whole website of like incredible indie producers that, you know, make movies and submit them, and so they get judged on these certain criteria from the you know, the kind of feminist porn crew, and so all that stuff is like really like some of it's super artistic and super out there, some of it's like a little bit more mainstream, and but it's all like incredibly diverse and inclusive. So there's heaps of places to do it, but we're just not talking about that. Like, people aren't really aware of it or know that it's a thing, because the black and white argument is so strong, right? And we just love to be either black or white, right? We like to polarize. We like to be in one camp or the other and not see any middle ground or not add any nuance to the conversation. So, and look, you know, something I haven't touched on, and I don't want to go too deep into this, is like, you know, there are guys, and I mean women as well, but I guess the guys that I work with who have problematic porn viewing habits, right? They might call themselves an addict, or they might say they've got this compulsion to watch porn. And so that's something else that I will work through guys with. You know, if they feel that it's beneficial for them to kind of go cold turkey and to not watch porn for a while and to kind of quote unquote reset or just kind of connect back into their body without any external stimulus, then I'll guide them through that as well. I won't, you know, if someone's kind of having a really difficult time with porn, I won't continue to just encourage them to watch it if it's like really stressful and having this kind of detrimental impact on them, regardless of what the porn is that they might be watching. So, because I know, yeah, there's a whole bunch of like the, you know, porn addict therapists as well who have some pretty strong opinions on pornography as well. So, you know, it's a whole thing. And like I said, I went on for 2 hours by myself with a jug of coffee in front of me and just ranted. So, but that as much as I can, that's me summarizing my position on porn.
That was amazing. Thank you for those resources and that point of view. I agree with you. And I love that there are these other resources, and that like you can be so intentional about it, and that it can truly be like a great tool, like you said. And I think that's so important. And something I want to ask you also is how do you encourage men to use consent with sex? Because that's a big problem.
Yeah, totally. So again, like I was saying before, it comes back to their own like body, I suppose. It comes back to their own understanding and their relationship with their own sexuality. Because if you, so I'll share a personal experience here with regards to my own understanding of sexuality. For me, my own personal sexuality. I did this workshop. It was a 5-day workshop actually with a lady called Betty Martin, and she's got this framework called the Wheel of Consent. Highly recommend checking it out for people. And one of these exercises is it's called the 3-minute game. And without getting too deep into this, like you essentially ask your partner how they would like to touch you for 3 minutes, and how you would like them to touch you for 3 minutes as well. So, you know, there was this opportunity for me to say, okay, how do I really want to touch this woman, this partner that was in front of me? And, you know, I said to myself, you know, I don't really want to do anything too explicit here. I just want to hold her. I just want to hug her. I just kind of want to have her in my arms. And she agreed to that. She said, yep, that's fine. You know, we sat there for 3 minutes, and I was just kind of hugging her, and I almost broke down into tears, because I kind of had this realization that for a long time, because I thought this was what was expected of men, or being a man was like actively trying to escalate things into like a sexual scenario, or like, you know, going for penetration, or going to touch a certain part of, you know, the young woman's body that I was with, right? Like I kind of thought for a long time, like that's what men do. Like we escalate. We are the assertive person. We should push to have sex. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, how many times have I crossed my own boundaries when I actually probably didn't want to have sex? I just wanted to kind of sit there and be held or hold her and just kind of be, just cuddle, I suppose. Cuddle is like the word I can think of. But I didn't do that because I was like, oh, that's not what men do. Men don't cuddle. Men go for penetration, go for sex, go for the home run. And so I had this like, I guess it was like grief or just process of like, I just crossed my own boundaries so many times. And then the layered on top of that was, oh my God, how many times did I cross a young woman's boundaries because of that as well? Even though, because I didn't want to have sex, I just thought that was what's expected of me. What must have she been thinking as well in those moments? So, like having that realization for me, like, was huge. And I still kind of get a little bit worked up and emotional about it, because like how many men, that I've worked with and that are out there, I suppose, are having this kind of feeling of like, oh, this is what it means to be a man in the bedroom. This is what it means, to be, masculine, sexual.
So many unspoken expectations.
Yeah, totally. So learning about that themselves is like one of the ways to start, is like recognizing your own boundaries. And then the extension of that, like I was saying before, is I guess like learning how to learning how to communicate, learning how to ask, right? And Betty's framework again is really valuable for this. But just like asking your partner how they want to be touched, asking your partner if they're ready to be touched as well, even. And it's all well and good to ask, but we know, right? And plenty of women have shared this, that even if they don't want to be touched, or even if they're not ready to be touched, or even if they don't want to be touched in a certain way, they won't voice that because, there's plenty of reasons women are taught to tolerate touch and tolerate sex, or they might be afraid of how he's going to react, or they're trying to placate him, or whatever it might be. So there's plenty of reasons for women to, plenty of reasons that women do not share, or do kind of quote unquote give consent when really they maybe didn't necessarily want to in that particular way. So creating the safety as well is really important for, because if you're going to ask to get an honest answer, you've got to create the safe container to receive that in. And so like suspending ego is a huge one for a lot of guys when they're asking for consent. And there's a few ways of doing that, but the simplest way is like, it's not personal, don't take things so personally when it comes to asking for things, because what happens in your body when you receive a no, right? And this is something that a lot of guys need to do work around, is two things oftentimes happen. Plenty of things happen, but two things that are really common for guys when they hear a no, particularly from a woman that they're really interested in sexually, is anger and frustration is one of the things that pops up a lot. Is like, I won't go down that route too much, but then there's another one that pops up, which is like, is a self-worth thing. Like, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And both of those things, both of those reactions, I suppose, aren't caused by the woman saying no. They're caused by your perception of yourself and what, this kind of idea that you have, this identity that you have of yourself, and something, and like something reacting inside of you to that no. She's done nothing wrong by saying no, or by saying yes, or by saying whatever. Something that's going on in you is something that needs to be processed. So like doing that emotional work as well, like how do you regulate your emotions? How do you suspend your ego? How do you suspend expectation when you're being sexual, right? That's a whole journey to go on as well. So there's a few things that go in, like, it's all well and good to just like simply ask, but there's a whole bunch of energetics and a whole bunch of power dynamics and a whole bunch of layers, I suppose, to just that simple question of asking for consent.
Yep. I love everything you said. I was with a couples concert one time, and she had us do that exercise because I lost that safety with my partner. He didn't make me feel safe anymore because he always pressured me to have sex and lots of other things. But she had us do that exercise where we would give and receive touch, and it was so healing for me. Like immediately I was able to drop into my body. So I think that exercise is great. And also I've experienced too, like saying no and them not being able to hold that. And then and then I feel guilty, there's all these things. So I think it's really important for both parties to learn how to hold space for that as well. So beautiful points you touched on. And another thing I was thinking about is how do you help men that have had sexual trauma? Because that's something else I haven't really heard about because you hear it a lot on the female end, but men also have sexual abuse trauma.
I actually don't specifically work with men that have sexual trauma. And the reason why is because I don't feel like I'm qualified enough, to be perfectly honest. I'm a coach, not a therapist. And so I have a pretty strong referral policy. If someone comes to me with like really heavy, either childhood trauma or just like sexual trauma in general, then my policy is to refer them on to a trauma-informed sex therapist. And there's a couple of amazing, like my lecturers, for example, here at Curtin University here in Australia. So to answer your question, I don't specifically work with people that have trauma, and I will go as far as to say that if you are working with people of trauma and you don't have a trauma-informed background, then you shouldn't be doing that work.
Agreed. Thank you for being honest with that and knowing your own boundaries.
And that took a while as well, especially the coaching mindset of like, oh, I've just got to get clients in. I don't care who they are. To work specifically with the people that I do now did take a little bit of finding out what my boundaries and limitations were. So I think that's also an important thing for people in this line of work to be considerate of, as well as like, who are the clients that you're comfortable and who is it that it's appropriate for you to work with as well. Like, I don't work with women, for example, because I'm not a woman. I can't empathize, I suppose on a deeper level like a woman could with a woman's experience. I don't have a womb. I don't have a clitoris. I don't have a vagina. I don't know what it feels like to, have that experience. So, but obviously there's reasons why a male and a man might want to coach a woman and vice versa, why a female client might want to see a man. But again, that's my personal philosophy.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And I remember one of your posts about coffee and erectile dysfunction. Will you touch on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So this is actually spurred on by a question that a client of mine had, and he had read somewhere that drinking coffee actually inhibits erectile function. So, drinking coffee kills your erections, apparently, according to this article that he read. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And also slightly biased because I drink about 2 cups of coffee a day. So I was like, I better just double check this. And so I went out and did a bit of research and looked at, just looked at some of the evidence and discovered that coffee may actually, and again, it was correlational, not causational, so this is not proven, but it may actually contribute to healthier erections, to stronger erections, because of the mechanisms of what coffee does. Like it kind of boosts a little bit of energy, boosts a little bit of your like nitric oxide. I forget the actual names, but the propofol, whatever they call the chemicals in the coffee as well. They can contribute to oxygenation as well of the blood, which is all things that are necessary for an erection to happen. The limitation came when it's like, at what point is that not beneficial, right? At what point are you drinking too much coffee? Because I'm not going to tell you to go out and drink like 8 liters of coffee a day and all of a sudden you're going to have rock hard erections, because there's like adverse effects of drinking too much coffee as well, right? With regards to like the nervous system, with regards to anxiety, with regards to perpetuating other things. So, and those other things also impact like sexual function as well. So there's that nice balance, and the research kind of suggests that maybe like a coffee a day, in conjunction with like drinking enough water and a kind of holistic, healthy diet is probably beneficial with regards to erectile health. If you're relying on coffee just by itself to get strong erections, you're probably missing the mark there, because there's so many other things that you can do which are way more effective and beneficial for erectile health.
Yes. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Last thing is, which I know is a common question for you, is to talking about how can men last longer, and like that whole topic. I know it's a big one, but maybe just a little bit on that. Yeah,
of course. So I'll put this very quickly and simply, pun intended, I suppose, with regards to quickly, is premature ejaculation, right? Or not coming before you are ready, or not coming before you want, is oftentimes a symptom of high tension in your body, right? So think about what happens when you ejaculate. You are oftentimes you're breathing quite quickly. If not, you're holding your breath, right? Or you're breathing up into your chest. It's very kind of like almost hyperventilating. There's a lot of tension and tightness in your body. This is known as myotonia. It's this kind of like squeezing and holding and pushing when you're ejaculating. Some guys, have this experience of like trying to push their ejaculation out as well. The heart rate goes up because of this as well, right? You're breathing quickly and you're tensing. Your heart rate's going to go up. Your temperature goes up, and all these things are characteristics of sympathetic nervous system activation, right? If we took that cluster of characteristics out of the erotic sense, right, out of the bedroom, let's say, and we applied them to some guy walking down the street, we saw all of a sudden this guy tense up and squeeze and convulse and hold his breath, and his heart rate went up and his temperature went up. We think this guy's having an anxiety attack, right? We think he's kind of having a bit of an episode. And that's because ejaculation is essentially a pleasurable anxiety attack, right? It's a function of the sympathetic nervous system, and there's reasons why, and it makes sense because it's a survival response, right? The sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. The other F's actually on the end of that, fight or flight, is freeze and feed and fuck or fornicate, if you want to be a little bit less vulgar. And so ejaculation is a survival mechanism. It's one of those 5 F's because it's a way of passing on your genes. It's a way of ensuring the survival of the species, right? It's part of this kind of survival mechanism. So what do we know about that? We know we're usually stressed when we're in our fight or flight response. We're usually in this state of tension, the state of tightness in the body physically, but also tension kind of energetically and mentally as well. Also known as anxiety, also known as performance anxiety as well. So one of the ways that we can last longer is to do the opposite of all those things that happen when we ejaculate, right? Instead of breathing really quickly and breathing really high or even holding our breath, try breathing down into the diaphragm. Try slowing your breath down as much as possible. Try relaxing your body, right? Instead of tensing up and tightening and trying to squeeze and push for an ejaculation or an orgasm, try and let go and surrender as much as possible. Try and relax your muscles as much as possible. Excuse me. And in conjunction with that, like instead of your heart rate going through the roof, try and slow your heart rate down as well. It's a similar thing with temperature. Temperature is a little bit harder to control. But like all those things, we have voluntary control over. Oftentimes medical textbooks will say that the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of the nervous system are part of the autonomic nervous system, which means we don't have voluntary control, but we do. We can slow our breath down. People like Wim Hof have shown us that we can do this, and we can transition from the sympathetic into the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, or the rest and digest branch, the relaxation branch. So if you want to last longer, very, very simply, right? It sounds very simple, but it's easier said than done, I suppose, is try and engage your parasympathetic nervous system as much as possible by slowing your breath down, relaxing your body as much as possible, slowing your heart rate, and in whatever way that works for you. There's obviously a whole host of different techniques and strategies and ways of doing that, but put it very simply, and again, this is all physiologically, I suppose. There's other things we can do with regards to energetics and psychology, but in terms of purely physiological ways of lasting longer is do everything opposite of what an ejaculation is, I suppose.
It's so beautiful how similar it is to a woman. Like for a woman to receive pleasure too, she must focus on her breath. And it's really cool to see the similarities. Obviously it's different, but it really is, there is a commonality between both of us.
Yeah. I mean, we're humans, we've got nervous systems, we have muscle groups, there's things that are very universal with regards to experiencing pleasure. And I often say to guys, your ejaculation is just a 5-second sticky white crotch sneeze. There's so much more pleasure to experience. Like the ejaculation doesn't have to be the pinnacle or the peak of your experience of pleasure. And so one of the ways that I work with guys is like reframing what their definition of orgasm is. Because oftentimes, like I said before, ejaculation and orgasm are thought of as the same thing, as like this peak on a graph. But instead of thinking of orgasm as like this transient peak that you reach and then as soon as you reach it, it's finished. if we can think of orgasm as a state, so that you're in this orgasmic state, and so that everything within, if we think of that graph, if we think of everything within that kind of state, that range is orgasmic, then you don't need to go to that ejaculation, right? You don't need to go to that peak, or you can choose to have that orgasmic release by having a non-ejaculatory orgasm, which is a whole nother story. But yeah, reframing your idea of what an orgasm is from a peak state to, from a peak experience to a range or a state can be really helpful as well.
That's incredible and so impactful because, yeah, when we limit it to that one thing of like just having that tiny little end goal, it's like you're missing, like you said, you're missing on the whole experience, which is like from start to finish and everything between. There's so much to enjoy, and it really amplifies the experience for both parties.
Totally.
And I guess just really quickly too, I do want to talk about how like there are like the prostate orgasms and others besides ejaculation, because I feel like most people don't know about that.
Yeah, right. So an ejaculatory orgasm, like we've been speaking about, is mediated by what's called the pudendal nerve, right? Which is a nerve that's connected to the sympathetic nervous system, like we were saying before. And there's actually two other nerves that we can neurologically orgasm through as people with male bodies. That's the hypogastric nerve and the pelvic nerve. The pelvic nerve is like, it innervates kind of around the hips and around the lower abdomen, so we can kind of experience pleasure. Oftentimes why when we ejaculate, we also experience a little bit of pleasure in the lower belly. But the hypogastric nerve is really interesting because it's predominantly carries parasympathetic fibers, which means it's connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, as we were speaking about before. And the hypogastric nerve innervates a little gland called the prostate gland. And the prostate gland is kind of like, it's often called the male G-spot, for example. And that's kind of because it's anatomically located similarly, in a similar position. If you're kind of like for example, if you're looking for the quote unquote G-spot on a person with a vagina, with them lying on their back, and you inserting a finger in and pressing up towards their belly button, usually about 2 knuckles in is where the G-spot might be, in that general vicinity. Similarly, if you're inserting your fingers into the anus of a guy and he's on his back and you're pressing up towards his belly button, then about 2 knuckles in and up towards the belly button is where the prostate is. It's on the back of the bladder. And the prostate is, like I said, capable of, through the hypogastric nerve, eliciting orgasms. And a prostate orgasm is different from an ejaculatory orgasm in 2 major ways. The first is because an ejaculation triggers a refractory period because of the mechanism of an ejaculation, because it's part of the sympathetic nervous system. The hypogastric nerve in the prostate doesn't trigger an ejaculation, right? Because it bypasses that part of the nervous system because it's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so because there's no ejaculation involved, there's no refractory period, which means that you can have another prostate orgasm, and then another one, and you can have as many as you like, really. The other main difference is because of the way the sympathetic nervous system innervates the entire body, right? It just goes to the vital areas of the body. The parasympathetic nervous system goes to the quote unquote non-vital areas of the body. So it goes out into all the peripheries of the body, right? The word para as well, the prefix para comes from the Greek para, which means beside. So it goes to everything that's beside the vital organs. So it goes to way more areas of the body because there's only a few vital areas of the body. So a prostate orgasm is a lot more diffuse. It's actually more quote unquote full-bodied in terms of your orgasm. So you experience it a lot more through the body rather than one of these like localized experiences that happen when you just have an ejaculation. So it's very, very different in that regard. And because it's, like I said, you can become multi-orgasmic through that, it oftentimes is described by a lot of men, and I'll describe it myself as well, as more intense than an ejaculation. It's oftentimes way more pleasurable because you can have more and because it's experienced more throughout the body. So that's it in a nutshell. There's obviously, I haven't spoken about any of the fear that guys have about exploring their ass or anal play or any of the internalized homophobia or possibly overt homophobia within that, or the fear of pain and all this other stuff. I recognize that's all out there. I haven't touched on it, but it's definitely a thing that I encourage men to explore, and it does take a bit of a process to kind of get to that point.
Thank you so much. And do you recommend that they maybe explore these things on their own first?
Yeah. So again, like what I've kind of shared a couple of times is doing things by yourself first before you start doing them with a partner. So, and I don't recommend necessarily doing it with a finger. It's quite actually difficult if you're interested in exploring that to kind of get the angles right and get your finger kind of down there. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in it, investing in I don't have one in front of me, but a prostate massager. They're ergonomically designed. They hit the prostate, and you can get ones that do or don't vibrate. You can get ones that are metallic, or ones that are made out of plastic or some other kind of silicone. And there's just a whole range of different toys out there. I'm a big fan of toys, and I advocate for men using more sex toys because I think they're amazing and really great tools. So I definitely recommend exploring and experimenting with yourself first before you then incorporate another person and all their stories and all their narratives and the pressure and all that stuff that can kind of come with that into your experience. So yeah, that's my advice is go slowly, use lube, and you can never use too much lube, and take your time and relax and breathe and focus on pleasure.
Thank you so much. So how can people find you, and what are you offering right now? Give us all the good details.
Cool. So you can find me on Instagram at @thecamfraser, and I've also got a website, which is cam-fraser.com. I got two major offerings. My one-on-one coaching, which I'm really passionate about. It's actually what I really enjoy doing. But if you're not looking for one-on-one coaching, you're looking for something a little bit more self-paced, I do have an online program called Outperform a Porn Star, which is a 6-week online program. And it fully subverts the idea of performance. So the title is a little bit tongue-in-cheek with regards to porn and performance and things like that, but it's all about exploring pleasure, learning how to experience non-ejaculatory orgasms, learning how to have these full-bodied experiences, not only by yourself, but then also with a partner, how you can share that with them, how you can be a sexual leader and invite them into the bedroom in a really open and honest and vulnerable way as well. Talk a lot about consent in there as well and creating those safe containers. Everything we've talked about today pretty much is really in-depthly covered in my Outperform a Porn Star 6-week online course. So that's my other major offering.
Such a cheeky name. I love it. It's very catching. I'm sure. And I forgot to ask you at this beginning, what was the last random act of kindness someone did for you?
Oh, that someone did for me. Wow. It wasn't very random. I'll say this. It wasn't a random act. It was very intentional because my fiance and I have got a 3-month-old little baby. And as most parents will probably attest to, it's tough, it's hard. And so there's been a lot of not necessarily random acts of kindness, but very intentional, deliberate acts of kindness of people cooking us food because we just do not have the time to cook food, having to manage and maintain this little dude. So we've had food dropped off literally just yesterday morning, and someone's over tonight dropping more food off. So it's been absolutely amazing seeing the community support us, which is really beautiful. It's just really humbling.
That's so beautiful and so important when you're a parent. Like, that's just not something you want to focus on. And it's nice to be able to lean on your community. So thanks for sharing that. And thank you so much for being here. I'll make sure to link all of your stuff.
Thanks so much for having me.